When the evidence is undeniable, but the denial is unbreakable, there comes a point where simple fraud denial mutates into something darker. It stops being, I disagree with the evidence, and becomes, reality is whatever we say it is. That's the crossing line from skeptic to zealot, from Democrat to something that looks an awful lot like a communist in spirit. The evidence piles up. Affidavits, video, statistical anomalies, whistleblowers, unsecured drop boxes, chain of custody breakdowns. Millions watched it happen in real time. Yet the response remains a calm, smiling, ironclad, nuh-uh, no counter evidence, no serious investigation welcomed, just blanket dismissal, slogan repetition, and institutional gaslighting. The facts don't matter. The narrative must hold. This is where denial reveals its true nature. It's no longer about protecting democracy, it's about protecting power. When a political faction decides observable reality is optional, they've adopted the core tenet of every authoritarian system. Truth is subordinate to the party. History is rewritten nightly. Dissenters are labeled enemies of the state. Institutions exist to enforce the lie, not discover the truth. That mindset doesn't stay contained to one election. It spreads. Speech becomes disinformation. Opposition becomes threat to democracy. Centralized control becomes the only solution to the problem they deny exists. Call it what it is. The moment fraud denial flips into ideological possession, you're no longer debating voter integrity. You're watching someone choose the comforting illusion of the collective lie over the uncomfortable friction of observable truth. That's not a partisan disagreement anymore. That's the philosophical foundation of every failed utopian experiment that ever demanded the public deny their own eyes. The denial isn't fragile, it's unbreakable by design, because once reality is declared optional, power becomes unlimited, and that's the real prize. There are historical authoritarian parallels to this unbreakable denial of reality we are experiencing right now. This pattern is consistent across regimes throughout the last century. When observable evidence threatens the ruling ideology or power structure, authorities respond not with investigation or correction, but with intensified narrative control. What begins as denial of specific frauds or failures evolves into a systemic demand that citizens reject their own senses and experiences. This shift marks a transition from ordinary political deception to authoritarianism, where truth is defined by the party, not reality. One of the starkest examples is Stalin's engineered famine in Ukraine, known as the Holodomor. Soviet authorities confiscated grain, banned movement, and left millions to starve, an estimated 7 to 10 million deaths. Despite clear evidence, including reports from diplomats and journalists on the ground, the regime mounted a total denial campaign. They refused international aid, labeled reports anti-Soviet Nazi propaganda, and punished anyone who spoke of the famine. Walter Duranty of the New York Times echoed the official line, downplaying or denying the catastrophe while it unfolded. The denial wasn't just cover-up, it reshaped reality itself. Admitting the famine would undermine collectivization and Stalin's infallibility. Citizens were forced into silence or complicity. This unbreakable denial helped consolidate totalitarian control. If the state could erase millions of deaths from official history, it could redefine any truth. This was able to happen because of narrative assistance from the New York Times. Walter Duranty was a British-born journalist who served as the New York Times Moscow bureau chief for about 14 years, roughly 1922 to 1936. To put it simply, he hid the truth from the public and published as though all was well with Stalin in Russia. Great Leap Forward aimed to industrialize China overnight through forced collectivization and wildly inflated production quotas. Local officials, fearing punishment, falsified harvest numbers upward. The state seized grain based on these lies, exporting food while villages starved. Between 30 to 45 million people died in the largest famine in recorded history. Despite widespread evidence, empty granaries next to corpses, cannibalism reports, and internal pleas, Mao and the CCP denied systemic failure. They blamed natural disasters, rightists, and kulaks, hoarding grain, which were prosperous Russian farmers. Media reported bumper crops. Critics were purged. Even after the partial internal acknowledgement, public propaganda maintained the lie for decades, framing it as 3 years of difficulty. Here, denial crossed into full authoritarian mode. Reality was subordinated to the ideological vision. Questioning the numbers wasn't policy disagreement, it was counter-revolutionary thought. Ladies and gentlemen, understand this clearly. The pattern we are witnessing is not new. It is the classic, time-tested machinery of communist control, refined over more than a century and now operating in plain sight. In every communist regime throughout history, two institutions have remained at the absolute center of power: the elections and the media. Without total dominance of information and the ritual of controlled democracy, the ideology collapses. Reality itself becomes the greatest threat. That is why the media is not merely biased, it is indispensable. Reality could not be hidden to this extent without the active, willing complicity of the press. The gaslighting, the synchronized denial, the ruthless suppression of dissent, none of it functions without the media acting as the regime's eyes, ears, voice, and enforcer. What we are living through right now is not American journalism gone wrong. It is the communist model of information control fully transplanted. None of this would be possible without domestic help. The fellow citizen, the colleague, the neighbor, the institutional leader who knows better but chooses ideological loyalty over truth, the useful idiot who parrots the narrative, the ambitious climber who sells out for status, or the true believer who has surrendered his mind to the cause. Every communist takeover in history relied on these internal enablers, those who open the gates from within. We must not ignore them. This is why President Trump has, in recent weeks, moved beyond calling them the deep state. He has begun naming them directly: communists. He has used the term more pointedly than at any other time in memory. He is not reaching for hyperbole. He is telling the American people exactly who has seized the levers of cultural and political power, with plenty of domestic collaborators waving them through. Walter Duranty, the New York Times correspondent who lied through his teeth to cover up Stalin's Holodomor famine, was not some rogue actor. He was the prototype, and yes, the London connection matters. Communism itself was born in the West, incubated in European intellectual circles, and weaponized through the manifesto. But the ideology never could have spread without captured media, culture, and entertainment. Those became the delivery system, the arteries pumping Marxism throughout the veins of nations. Communist-owned or influenced outlets, Hollywood propagandists, academic echo chambers, and cultural institutions did the heavy lifting, and they still do. Today's unbreakable denial, in the face of undeniable evidence, is not merely partisan stubbornness. It is the psychological and spiritual fruit of a long-term communist information warfare campaign, enabled every step of the way by domestic traitors. Pride, identity, and fear have been expertly manipulated to keep millions locked in the lie. But the mask is slipping, the pattern is too familiar, the grip is too recognizable, and the American people, millions of whom witnessed the irregularities firsthand, are waking up. The fight is not ultimately against a political party alone. It is against a resurrected communist apparatus that has captured our institutions, perverted our elections, and weaponized our own media against us, with the eager assistance of traitors in our midst. Recognizing it for what it is, that is the first and most important step towards breaking its hold. The evidence is undeniable. The denial has been unbreakable. But the truth, once awakened, has a way of shattering even the strongest illusions. May God grant us clarity, courage, and resolve to see this through.